Yamiche, break down, give me the quick details of this stay from Justice Alito.
Well, it's certainly an important development here, and I want to make sure I'm reading part of this because I think it's important. Justice Alito is granting the Justice Department's request for an administrative stay to preserve the status quo when it comes to this abortion pill. He called for a response from the plaintiffs that originally filed the Texas lawsuit. And this means that last week's decision, as you said, will not go into effect tonight. But this is only stayed until 11:59 p.m. on Wednesday, April 19th, 2023. So this means that for now, if you want access to this pill, from my understanding and from reading this, nothing is changing as of yet. But this shows that the Supreme Court is going to be looking at this and that both sides will be able, it seems, to plead their case in front of the Supreme Court. We have to remind folks that this is possibly going to be the most important abortion decision or abortion looking at an issue with abortion when it comes to this issue after Roe v. Wade, because we saw, of course, that huge decision, that sea change when Roe v. Wade was overturned. And now this is really the next big front in talking to people about abortion and talking to people about abortion access in this country.
Well, let me bring in Robert Barnes here, who's on Deadline and is gracefully taking a quick break to give us your perspective. Robert, nobody understands how this court works as well as you do, maybe a couple other people on Earth. So tell me how should we read into this ruling? Alito, essentially, it's a 1-week stay. What does that mean? Or 5-day stay. What does that mean?
Yeah, I don't think you should read anything about the merits of the case or what the court might ultimately do. The court was faced with a very short time frame here, had to make a decision by midnight. So this gives them the chance to get a little more briefing, to sort of take a breath. It keeps the status quo in place until next week, as you have explained. And so then the court will face some other options about what to do.
So what are those other, what's the most likely way this plays out next week? They'll schedule a full hearing for down the road. Is there going to be a full hearing Monday or Tuesday? Walk me through the scenarios.
No, there wouldn't be a full hearing then. What would happen, the government has said, if you want to take this up right now, schedule full briefing and a hearing and a decision before you recess this summer. But the court doesn't have to do that. The court either could put this ruling from the lower courts on hold and hear the case next term, or the court could decide to let these lower court decisions go into effect. All of this is in place of the regular process, not in place of, but to sort of allow the regular process of the appeals courts going first and really looking in depth at the merits of this case.
Do you read anything into the idea that Justice Alito wants to hear from the original plaintiff?
No, that's a standard procedure. And I should also say that the reason Justice Alito is doing this is not because he wrote the Dobbs decision, although he did, but because he is the justice designated by the court to receive emergency orders from the Fifth Circuit.
So if they want to hear briefs, so basically, does this mean they get briefs, they have to be filed, I believe it's by the 18th, so they're just going to make a... What happens the next day? They read these briefs and they make a decision about whether to keep going or not?
Yes, and whether or not to extend this stay that they have now put in place or whether to get rid of it. That would be the first thing that they have to decide. And then they would have to decide whether or not they want to hear this case on an emergency basis. As I say, the court usually likes appeals courts to go first and to try to, work through all the issues that a case like this involves. But they don't always do it. And the other thing that sort of pushed them here was they have a different judge in the state of Washington saying this drug has to remain available in 17 states in the District of Columbia that came to me with their request. And so it's a very complicated situation that the court's trying to work through.
And just quickly, Robert, and then I know you got to go on Deadline. Do we assume that that there were just that there were at least 5 votes, or is this an Alito-only temporary decision before, or is this a case where there had to be 5 votes for this temporary stay?
No, I think that there surely were. I'm sure that this is what the rest of the courts would like to do. But Justice Alito did this on his own, and that is often the case when, as I say, a justice from one of these appeals courts is faced with making a very quick decision and issues an administrative stay.
All right, Robert Barnes, I promised that I would get you in and out. Again, I know you've got your own news organization, your own bosses to report to in this breaking news, so much appreciate you. Yamiche.
Thanks for having me.
I'm going to bring Laura Jarrett in here, but Yamiche, I want to get you to respond. Where do we expect the Justice Department, what do they hope to have here? Do they want just this whole thing to go away? Or are they essentially preparing for a hearing in the Fifth Circuit?
Well, from my understanding, at least from what we hear from the Justice Department, they are saying that this ruling, if it is allowed to stand and if the FDA is allowed to be, if an FDA approval is allowed to be taken away by a court, that won't just have impact on this abortion pill, it will have impact on all sorts of other medications, whether that's Alzheimer's, whether that's cancer, whether that's all sorts of other things that the FDA approves. So my understanding is that the Justice Department wants to say we should continue to leave scientific approval in the hands of the FDA, and that they want to be able to say that this should not be something that is taken away by a court, the approval should be able to stand. And when I talk to people who are close to this, and I talk to people who are watching this case, of course, they're also focused specifically, of course, on the abortion piece here, because as you said, something like 50% of the women who are having abortions in this country use medication abortion. And this is seen as very, very scary that this could be taken away from them. This is in some ways the right continuing to go forward and trying to find restrictions and ways to lessen access to abortion after having that big generational win in Roe v. Wade. I remember at the time talking to conservative activists saying that they were going to continue to go forward, that this was not sort of winning Roe v. Wade was not going to be the only thing that they were going to go after. So when you look at the Justice Department, they're asking for something specific, but also when you're looking at people who are worried about access for abortion, they're hoping that all of this goes away and that women are able to have more access.
Bring in our senior legal correspondent, Laura Jarrett. Laura, what role do you believe the Washington state ruling, which was in direct conflict with the Texas ruling, played in Justice Alito's decision?
A lot, because it sets up a direct conflict, and a direct conflict is typically one that the Supreme Court wants to resolve in the lower courts to give them guidance so that you don't have sort of this patchwork of bizarre rulings where literally the FDA could be held in contempt of court for not following that Washington ruling. We talk about it, being co-equal, certainly those two district courts, but if they don't follow that Washington one, it could be quite serious, especially since the judge doubled down on it yesterday, reiterating you have to follow this order, FDA. So it is certainly possible that Alito found that to be one of the reasons why it would be prudent to at least put on the administrative stay. Now, we should be clear. Just because he's done this administrative stay doesn't mean that when it comes to the merits of this issue, he's going to rule in favor of the Biden administration. We've seen this before where he puts on an administrative stay and then it comes out a different way when it comes to the merits. But what this really does, especially since it's only him doing this, is it just preserves the status quo to get everyone out from underneath this midnight deadline, which by all accounts was sort of this arbitrary deadline that the judge had set for no reason for a drug that had been on the market for 23 years, mind you. And so I think the idea was, let's just hear everybody out. We haven't even heard from the plaintiffs. And so the justice is ordering, obviously, the plaintiffs to respond to this because they haven't so far. We've only heard from the Justice Department and the pill manufacturer.
But, Laura, what is 5 days by?
What is 5 days by?
Yeah.
Oh, well, the Supreme Court, I think, has enough clerks and enough smart folks in that building to figure out what they want to do with this. But at least it doesn't. The whole idea is if they had asked for just a pure stay, the worry was they wouldn't be able to get themselves together enough by just like 6 hours from now, right? Or I guess more than that to be able to put it in. And so that's why you ask for the administrative stay. It's just because of the time crunch. The longer stay issue, again, it's not clear how they'll come out, but I think you might see a decision by Wednesday. Or at least Thursday.
Let me ask you this. What are I guess the various scenarios are they could throw it back to the Fifth Circuit and tell them to do a full hearing.
Which it's already agreed to do. The Fifth Circuit has agreed to expedite this.
Right.
So if, in fact, they say, okay, we're going to keep the stay on the district court order in Texas. So Kazmarik's stuff essentially stays on hold. So then procedurally what happens is the case goes back down to the Fifth Circuit. They will hear it on an expedited basis in May. The Fifth Circuit tends to lean conservative. If it rules against the Justice Department, then that will go back up to the Supreme Court for a full appeal. But at least the stay preserves the status quo while the case is, circles around the courts.
And Laura, is that your assumption? Is that the most likely scenario, that this is going to get stayed until there's a full hearing, and there's a full hearing at the Supreme Court? So this could get. Bob Barnes was essentially kind of predicting that it could be the next term, in the fall, that the Supreme Court says we're going to hear this and we're going to stay this till, say, the end of the year.
I'm not so sure. If you had asked me that 2 years ago, I might have a different answer. I think after the court struck down Roe, I'm not so sure that's what they'll do here, especially because remember what we're talking about is not the invalidation of the original approval of mifepristone. That's no longer on the table. Even the Fifth Circuit said that wasn't okay. All we're talking about now is a number of steps that the FDA takes starting in 2016 that makes it easier to get the drug. And so the justices may say, hey, in the year 2000, people weren't being harmed, and for 16 years you had this drug and nobody said that there was irreparable harm. So how can you say that there's irreparable harm now just because you can't get it in the mail?
Right.
They may not find that burdensome enough, and that's why I'm not so sure that they will stay this piece of the order.
Yamiche, there's been some chatter that one idea circulating in the Biden world is resubmitting mifepristone for a new authorization. Is that on the table or not?
It's a good question. I'm not sure if it's on the table. It's obviously something that could be on the table if you have an administration that's just trying to find new ways to give women access to abortion, because this, of course, is an administration that realizes that they are dealing with a Supreme Court that already overturned precedent, that has already shown that it is, in their minds, willing to, they would say, revoke a right that women had lived with for years and years and years. So I think it's not, while I don't know exactly whether or not they're going to do that, I think it is not surprising that could be something that happens, because this is an administration that has said that they're going to try to do everything they can other than break the law to get women access to abortion.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.